How to checkmate with knight and bishop. The first step is to get the king onto the same color as the bishop, so in this case it's a light square. Well, the idea is we need to use our pieces to cut off squares and force him there. So in this position you would play knight c2, and we're just getting the king out of the corner. Now it's not about giving checks because he just goes back, but instead we need to just keep pushing him forward, so you just play a waiting move, and we're just controlling all of these squares and forcing king c1. Now we want to continue this, so we need to cut away the b1 square with bishop a2, and it's just the same thing. We're just bringing the king closer to the corner. But now it gets a little trickier because black is trying to escape, and if we cover that with knight d4, then it seems like he just escapes to f2. Well, this is exactly what we want, but after king f2, the knight is going to follow this pattern through. So knight e2 locks away these two squares, and you might think he's escaping to g4. Well, remember, this endgame isn't always about giving checks, but it's about cutting away the squares. And so black has to go back, and we just keep cutting away. And in these positions, if the king ever tries to run the other way, then our knight is already blocking him, so we can just bring our king along. And now there's just no escape because of the check, and this should be very familiar to just hold all the squares and push him to the corner. So if king f1, we hold the g2 square, and if he goes back, then there's check, forcing him this way, and we're simply just going to repeat this process until he gets to the corner. And now we wait for the king to get on one of these squares and deliver the checkmate. How to checkmate with knight and bishop. The first step is to get the king onto the same color as the bishop, so in this case it's a light square. Well, the idea is we need to use our pieces to cut off squares and force him there. So in this position you would play knight c2, and we're just getting the king out of the corner. Now it's not about giving checks because he just goes back, but instead we need to just keep pushing him forward, so you just play a waiting move, and we're just controlling all of these squares and forcing king c1. Now we want to continue this, so we need to cut away the b1 square with bishop a2, and it's just the same thing. We're just bringing the king closer to the corner. But now it gets a little trickier because black is trying to escape, and if we cover that with knight d4, then it seems like he just escapes to f2. Well, this is exactly what we want, but after king f2, the knight is going to follow this pattern through. So knight e2 locks away these two squares, and you might think he's escaping to g4. Well, remember, this endgame isn't always about giving checks, but it's about cutting away the squares. And so black has to go back, and we just keep cutting away. And in these positions, if the king ever tries to run the other way, then our knight is already blocking him, so we can just bring our king along. And now there's just no escape because of the check, and this should be very familiar to just hold all the squares and push him to the corner. So if king f1, we hold the g2 square, and if he goes back, then there's check, forcing him this way, and we're simply just going to repeat this process until he gets to the corner. And now we wait for the king to get on one of these squares and deliver the checkmate. How to checkmate with knight and bishop. The first step is to get the king onto the same color as the bishop, so in this case it's a light square. Well, the idea is we need to use our pieces to cut off squares and force him there. So in this position you would play knight c2, and we're just getting the king out of the corner.
Today, I'm going to be covering some basic endgame tips for beginners. Endgames are the most decisive part of the game, so hopefully this will help you get some wins. Tip number 1. If you are down material, try to avoid trades and getting into an endgame. Vice versa, if you're up material, try to trade and get into an endgame. Let me give you an example to make it more obvious. In this position, white is up a pawn, so the correct plan is to try to trade off all of the pieces possible, because material advantage is much more important in the endgame. Usually in king and pawn endgames, if you're up just one pawn, you can win the game. That brings me to rule number 2. It's usually very useful if you can create a pass pawn. Pass pawn is a pawn that cannot be stopped by any enemy pawn on its route to promotion. So if there was a pawn either on a7, b7, or c7, this would not be a pass pawn. The pawn on f3 is not a pass pawn because the pawn on g7 is blocking its path. Pass pawns are very useful plans in the endgame because you're trying to promote to a piece that has more value. So how do we use that in our initial exercise? That brings me to rule number 3, which is creating a passed pawn from a pawn majority. In this position, we have 3 pawns versus black's 2 pawns on the king side. So what you're trying to do is somehow trade one of them off so that you create a passed pawn. I'll go forward a few moves to show that idea. So let's say you start marching your pawn towards where you want to trade it. The kings are always active in endgames, and eventually you're able to trade one of your pawns, and now we have a passed pawn. I'll quickly show you how white would win this endgame just because it applies to a lot of other positions as well. When you're up a pawn in a king and pawn endgame, and it's a passed pawn, what you can usually do is make your opponent basically run out of moves to the point where you can keep marching your pawn forward, and when it gets close enough, you could actually sacrifice it and then go pick up some of your opponent's enemy pawns. I'll play some moves out because it makes a lot more sense when you see it. So black starts doing all of their pawn moves. Now they're stuck, and basically you're just waiting for their king to be forcibly pushed back. You can get your pawn closer to promotion and then eventually just give it up as a sacrifice, go get the rest of the pawns, because usually your opponent will be too slow, and then you will win in terms of being able to promote first. Speaking of passed pawns, that takes me to rule number 4, which is the square rule. The square rule helps you figure out quickly if your king can catch an enemy pawn. Let's say you're playing with the black pieces here. White is trying to get to promote on a8. It's black's turn to move. Do you catch the pawn? There's a really quick way to know, and the way you do it is you draw a diagonal line from the enemy pawn all the way to where it would promote, and then you use that to complete a square. If your king would step into the square, then that means you'll catch the pawn. If it doesn't, you won't. So here, king e5, a5, king d6, a6, king c6, a7, king b7, and you catch the pawn right as it promotes. That brings us to rule number 5, which is activate your king in the endgame. Unlike the opening, there are far fewer pieces in the endgame, so usually your king is not in threat if it's going and adventuring outside. Let me show you this position. If the king is on d4 and white to move, white wins. If the king is on f2 and white to move, it's a draw. Usually, if one side has their king active and the other side doesn't, that is going to mean a win for the side that has the active king. This position is winning for white because the king can go to c5 and attack the pawn on b5 twice. Let's say the black king was more active, and instead of being on h7, it was on d6. Then it would have opposition with the king, and this position would be a draw. Now let me show you a more complicated example that also illustrates king activity. White to move. Should white move rook c1? The answer is no, because if you move rook c1, that forces the white king back, and black's king activity is going to actually help black win this game. You end up in this position, and then the endgame is a little bit complicated, but it is winning for black. The last tip is understanding opposition. In this position, if it's black's turn to move, then white has opposition. That means that black would be the one who is forced to move away. If it was white's turn to move, then that means black has opposition. It feels really abstract, so I'm going to give you an example that shows why that's important. Here's an example where opposition is very handy. If it's white's turn to move, then black has the opposition, and black can draw the game. If it's black's turn to move, then white has the opposition, and white can actually win the game. This endgame is a little complicated, so I will just simplify it. But let's say it was white to move, the white king would move over, and opposition is so important because it can help you force the enemy king away. Black would continue to chase the white king around, and it'd be impossible for the white king to make progress. Now, if it was black's turn to move in this position, let's say the king would be forced to go to d6 or to f6, then the white king would progress on the opposite side, and this is actually a winning endgame where white will end up being able to promote. Please let me know in the comments if you have any feedback or if there's any other educational videos you'd like to see. Also, if you want to support the channel, we have these hoodies and our own custom chessboards at botazlive.shop. Thanks for watching!
Running a digital signage network takes a lot of work. Dashboards to navigate, playlists to update, reports to pull. Then the constant need for optimized content. How do these digital signage superstars do it? An alarming amount of coffee mostly. And if they're lucky, maybe an intern. But let's face it, interns leave. Usually right after you finish training them, which means back to square one again. One more trip to the coffee pot. You don't need an intern, you need an agent. Populo's AI agents don't take vacations. They don't need onboarding. They just work. 24/7, monitoring your screens, ensuring uptime, designing new content, pulling reports, taking the time-consuming tasks so you can focus on driving value with digital signage. Our AI agents even keep your system tidy, flagging outdated files and archiving things you forgot about months ago. With Populo AI, your digital signage network doesn't just run well, it scales. Smarter, cleaner, more autonomous. Better signage, faster, with the appropriate amount of coffee. Once you try Populo AI, you'll never go back.
Force the king to the light square corner. So you go here. If black goes here, use the knight. You cut the king. It can't run. He has to come back here, and now you go king d6. If you go king e8, trying to escape, I check you. The king has to come back. And now there are many ways to win. Not sure which one's the most precise, but probably one of the simplest ways is to go knight c5, king e8, or king c8. You go bishop d3. Black wants to not run towards this corner because it's a light square checkmate, so you come back. And now you go bishop b5. King has to come over. You go knight e6. King still can't run. It goes here. You go here. King can't come forward. And now it's stuck in the corner, so you go king c8. King b6. King cannot run. Bishop and the knight hold the two squares. King comes here. You go here. King e8, check. Here, check, and checkmate. Of course, the king can't move anywhere. So that's one way. So in the final...
So what you're saying is I should either go f5. Yeah, he goes f5.
Which he
and what's
played.
amazing is now you're allowing white to queen and keep both knights, but white is powerless to stop h4. And that leaves
Bingo.
white with only two knights.
That's amazingly, what a move, what an insight. I mean, oh, sometimes you just got to tip your hat and say, well done.
Unbelievable. He's going to play h4, and then
And there's
his job will
nothing
be
he
to
can
give
do.
away these pawns.
Right.
Because two knights against pawn could be a win sometimes, but not in this
Right.
case. I think the pawns are too far advanced.
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
And he's pushing him f4, so he's threatening to go h2. Knight
F3.
takes h and f3. And as you said, two knights versus a king. Now, the question is the f3 knight blockade the right zone?
But look
There
at
was...
how.
Sorry, there's this wonderful book. I believe it's the series of Averbach, right?
Mhm.
Where he draws the zone of the two knights and king. And is the pawn on f4 in the drawing zone or not?
I think it is. I want to say that if you shifted it back one square to f5 and blockaded it on f4, I think that's winning. If I remember
That's
correctly.
winning.
But again, it's been a while since I've consulted
Yes.
566 of Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual.
That's
or
right.
Averbach's book.
Right. For me, Dvoretsky's manual wasn't available at the time as a professional. It was really the Averbach series of books. It was Reuben Fine, the basic chess endings. That was what American players were raised on. And the Soviet players were raised on Averbach's. And then they got translated. And we all thought, okay, now we know what we're doing.
You know the secrets.
Yeah, now we got this.
Now, the reasoning, the logic behind why it's actually good for the side of the two knights to keep the pawn alive is very simple. Once the king is boxed in, the king needs to
Exactly.
be stalemated,
Ooh.
and then you can, at the right moment, move this knight away in order to give black an extra move so that you can,
There's
you know,
no release the
there's
stalemate.
no stalemate. Right, exactly. And apparently the Evo bar is now
Evo.
showing a win for white. Made in 27. White is winning now.
Exactly.
Was white winning to
Ooh.
begin with?
I didn't see where Amin did anything wrong. Maybe he had to put his king on A8, and
I think that's
by
right.
by being on the H8 square, he's too close to the vicinity of the F3 knight.
I think you're exactly right, Yasser. I think he had to keep his king in the other corner, and you can't smoke that king out without moving this knight. But if you move the knight
Right.
when black pushes the pawn, now what's going to happen is that the king's going to get boxed in, and at the
Right.
right moment, the F3 knight is going to leave, and then black is going to have a couple of extra moves. It's going to be
Exactly. So he just went to the wrong corner, I think, is the bottom line here. So king F6, king G8. Now we got to make sure we keep the knight F5, knight G7, but then you've got the 50 move rule.
When is it? No, but I feel like you have like 20 moves left. So
Exactly.
he needs to be efficient, but he's got mate in 11.
Mate in 11, he say.
96.
Whoa. Good.
And then king
Yeah.
G5 and king G6. It's over.
Yes. So there was a lot of people wrongly think that the rules of chess are written in stone. And that's not true. The rules of chess always are in constant flux. And at one time, the 50 move rule was changed to 75 moves. And that is because of this precise ending. There was a lot of positions that were made in 75. Bravo.
Wow.
Vladimir, bravo.
Hey everybody, Walton Goggins here. Starting a business is never easy, but with GoDaddy Arrow, that endeavor is about to become a whole lot easier.
Hey man, you got this.
Create a website that looks like you know what you're doing, even if you don't know what you're doing, because you're using a website that developed a tool that knows exactly what it's doing. It helps you design a logo. This is what we came up with. We put it here, we put it everywhere on our website, and we even put it right here. What I'm telling you, from one central command center